Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we discuss the promises and perils of emerging technology and innovation. I'm your host today, David Dunmoyer, and we're going to have a second discussion on what is becoming, and really has been for quite some time, one of the defining issues in tech policy. And it's the right to repair. So for longtime listeners, you know that we are passionate advocates for this. We have been working in the trenches here in Texas. But today I am joined by an expert who has been working in this field and promoting right to repair laws, not just in Texas, but across the country for years and years. Nathan Proctor joins us today from the Public Interest Research Group. And if I'm not mistaken, your title is you're the leader, the campaign director over.
Yeah, I'm the senior campaign director for the operations that we do on right to repair.
And for folks who aren't familiar, do you want to take a second to talk about the Public Interest Research Group and
Sure.
some of the issues you work on?
Yeah. My buddy Kyle likes to say that he had to summarize PIRG at a whim, and he said, "Oh, they're the group that's trying to make sure society will be around in 50 years." And so we were founded in the 1970s with the vision of, hey, let's stand up for the public interest. Let's put the public interest first. Yeah. We recognize that a lot of decisions in society are made by powerful special interests, and often are things that are unpopular or don't honor the fact that we all have a voice in the process. And so we use organizing and advocacy to try to find those things that are broadly beneficial to the maximum number of people. And so we work on things around public health, the environment, protecting democracy so that people have the freedom to choose a good life for themselves. And that's really our vision. And we've been doing that. We mostly do that at the state level. So we have chapters all over the country. Yeah. And we've been doing that work for 50 years, and I've been doing that work since 2005.
Yeah, great. Well, and in terms of all the work you do, central to public interest and utilitarianism, when we're looking at issues where there's widespread acceptance and support, right to repair is really at the core of that. I think many of our listeners are aware broadly of the right to repair. I'd love if you can start. How did you get into the right to repair? What does it mean in terms of your passion as an advocate and choosing this as your day job? How does right to repair fit into that?
Yeah, of course, growing up, like Saturday was the day where we fixed stuff, and I have all these memories of, taking apart stuff that I wasn't supposed to take apart. But it's such a creative and educational and guys, engaging project to learn how something works, find out what's wrong, and fix it. Right. It totally changes our relationship with the things that we have. And we were working on trying to figure out what campaigns exist at this intersection of basically the agency in our society. Like one of the key negative trends that we identified, and this is like 2014, 2015, we were trying to develop campaigns in this area. I feel like we're losing our control over our lifestyles in America. Like somebody else is deciding how everything is. And it used to be a local hardware store and a local TV repair shop. And now it's just you feel like there's some corporate board 2,500 miles away that does not care at all about your local community, making all those decisions for you, and then also making a whole set of decisions that are annoying, like just like the tech's not working, like things are not working the way that they should. Everything feels crappy and like a trap waiting to happen to you, and totally unsustainable. Electronic waste is the fastest growing part of our waste stream. So to me, right to repair is like, there's parts of the environment story that I really connect to. There's parts of this like democracy, we should control our stuff part of it that really connects with me, and the fact that it's all kind of lumped together, and I can run a campaign that gives us more control over the stuff in our lives, lets us actually make more sustainable choices, that supports a dispersed, more localized economy of like people who have good, positive careers that are local. Like all of that is like, every day when I think about what right to repair could mean and what a more repair robust system would mean, like it's like such a good innovation, such a good improvement on current things, because I don't think anybody really likes expensive stuff imported that breaks instantly, that you can't fix, and is controlled by some company that's making all their decisions based on what shareholders want. I mean, that's not good.
Yeah. No, and it kind of flies in the face of what basic logic would dictate, which is, your point is you started this journey, if you will, as a kid tinkering. And there is something innately beautiful and virtuous about being able to work with your hands. I know we were chatting beforehand, before the show started, about we both play musical instruments. And there's something about, we're not professional musicians, but we enjoy the process that comes with it. And Matthew Crawford writes about this in terms of technology colonizing different aspects of our life. And when there's a centralized top-down control, 100% agree with what you're saying. We almost accept this premise that some of my good libertarian friends would say, which is hyper-specialization. We need to hire the plumber to take care of this. We need to hire this expert to take care of this. We're losing touch with that side of humanity where it's great to just build the table yourself, even if it's not going to be perfect. There's something meaningful in the pursuit of it, and I would say it's dignifying. And so, okay, so you talk about this as kind of your entry into it. I guess I'll ask you first and foremost, when you're talking to folks about right to repair, what tends to be the reaction? Because, and I ask this almost rhetorically, education and awareness is a big hurdle to making sure folks understand kind of what the right to repair is. And once they get a sense of what it entails, how do they tend to respond when you're talking to different folks about this?
I mean, I have a line that I say, like, what do you do? And I say, well, I believe you should be able to fix your stuff. And then people like yeah,
pretty sensible.
Well, I think that there's also there's a dawning realization that's a combined. That's true. And also, I recognize why somebody would have to be working on that.
Right.
Like, people have had this experience where something breaks and doesn't work right.
Yeah.
And you take it back to the manufacturer, and they give you the runaround. You talk to a phone tree and then an AI chatbot, and then they're like, oh, just buy a new one. And you're like, I could have figured that part out.
Yeah.
Like, I want to fix it. What are my, and then, so I think people have had this experience. They understand the problem intuitively. Maybe they've never heard somebody say, we actually need to make reforms so that you can fix these products. But once you but the premise is like immediately understood. Sure. Yes, I've experienced this.
Yeah. So, okay, with that, I mean, the polling, beforehand, I was looking at different public opinion polls that have been done on this. I think one of the greatest litmus tests is for states that have had ballot measures on this. We're seeing close to 90% support. So this isn't a political, partisan issue. You already walked through 5 of the reasons why right to repair is prudent and good public policy. So we have overwhelming support. What's going on? Softball question to you. Why don't we have robust right to repair laws across the country? Is it for job security? Surely it's not.
Well, I certainly caused the employment of a lot of lobbyists.
Sure.
So maybe working on right to repair is just a way to keep all America's industry lobbyists working all the time.
Sure.
Full employment for lobbyists is really the program. No, with anything that there's strong public support for, if it hasn't happened, there's somebody who's benefiting from the status quo, and they're not going to give up without a fight. So, I would say the journey that companies have been on, the tech companies that we've, worked with and worked against on this topic, they started, and it was like, well, I mean, let's not change anything. Why would we want, we've set the rules the way we want them. Yeah. Like, I don't want to change them. But as time, as we've kind of mobilized that public support, companies have really started to question. I think one of the big problems in the way that our economy is run now is that so much short-term thinking has just clouded people's common sense. And so, but that comes back. Like, if they actually have to grapple with this idea, I think that they start, even these big tech companies start to come around to be like, no, actually what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And a lot of the people who make this stuff and design the computers that we're using or whatever, like, they only do this for like 5-7 years, and then these products are around for however long. So I think that some of it is like education. Like, you haven't even thought about this. You haven't even been through 2 generations of your own work.
Right.
And then you've moved on to do something else. So I think that part of it is, yes, these tech companies are the reason why we have struggled to get right to repair done. And I would say tech companies is probably unfair.
Sure.
everybody who manufactures anything doesn't want. They want to control the repair process. There's clear economic incentive reasons why you would want to be able to set the cost of repair with no competition or drive replacement of products with no alternative. Those are both very good outcomes if you're just thinking about selling products and services.
Sure.
But there's a lot of other downsides, which the more you make these companies experience, like if you're a farmer and your equipment goes down and the only option is the dealer, but every other farmer in your area is using the same equipment in the same way at the same time, and the dealer's overrun at that during those key windows. So they're like, it's going to be 6 weeks before we can come out.
Sure.
And we've designed the equipment that only we can do it.
Yeah.
Like now all of a sudden you have the dealers are dealing with their neighbors and the people they sit next to at church losing their income because of these decisions. And you start, like, I think that's where I think the energy of Right to Repair has come from in the grassroots.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And I remember Right to Repair is one of the issues when I worked in California public affairs. I didn't have any clients where this was an issue we were taking up, but I started my tech policy. That's what I want to do. The Right to Repair in California it's been years and years and years that folks have been pushing for this. And I remember I went down this rabbit hole, and as we started doing more research here at TBPF, even more so, these videos, there's actually a lot emerging now on social media of refrigerators that were made in the 1950s and 60s that were just incredibly durable, reliable. The user interface was better, and go figure, they had a manual that broke down if you needed to repair your fridge, here's how you do it. Yeah. So I think it's worth noting that the trope, they don't make things like they used to. I mean, it's happening across a lot of sectors, legitimately real time. And this is where we're seeing a connect to between, when you look at anything that has 90% support, that means it's not just political lines, but it's age lines too. And in tech policy, one of the struggles we have is, data privacy or kids' online safety, for example. There's a very big divide between the age cohorts. On Right to Repair, the older generations understand, yes, I remember that refrigerator the way it used to be. And when I or my husband or my wife was able to do the repairs in our home, I think that's, to your point, that's the grassroots up effect that it has, where we can see real time how things are changing. And if you want to
I'm only 42, right? And when I was a kid, and we were talking about playing musicians, like how many amps and different pieces of hi-fi equipment have I tinkered with and fixed? And like the idea that we're like, oh, well, the stuff we're doing now, we really shouldn't be fixing that. And I was like, why? We actually made stuff that was made to last, and it still works and it's still good. And in some cases, like people are hunting it out.
Right.
My father-in-law bought us a sewing machine from like the 1960s. There's not a piece of plastic in the entire thing. It's metal.
Right. Yeah.
Everything is metal.
Yeah.
And when we bought it at the used store, they gave us the full service manual. Yeah. If you buy a new sewing machine, you will not get that new brand new. This is how it was always handled from the beginning, and it just changed in the last 40 years. Yeah. And there's no reason why we can't just go back to a world where we had all the tools and parts and information we needed to fix stuff, and companies just expected that when they designed something, like, oh, somebody's going to need to fix this, and it should be doable, and that needs to be part of the design process.
This is a completely out of left field question, but this just has me thinking. Do you think there are consequences in terms of the industriousness or entrepreneurship of Americans because we're doing less tinkering and less work? And I'm thinking about this because, you hear the Elon Musk story, Steve Jobs, they all started as tinkerers on computers. Are we losing the next class of innovators because, okay.
Yes, we are 100%. Well, it's not we're losing it. We're just preventing Americans from competing with the rest of the world because do you think in China right now that they care about the intellectual property laws that prevent them? I mean, no, people just open stuff and fix it, and they get the parts and they get the manuals, and nobody is stopping that.
Sure.
So they understand how this stuff works. I mean, I had a journalist friend of mine who went to the Shenzhen electronics market. These people are flipping apart iPhones in 30 seconds, blowing his mind how fast they're doing it. You don't think that there's entrepreneurs, there are techie people in America who would be doing that?
Right.
And then and like Steve Wozniak recorded a video on Right to Repair, which I encourage your audience to go check out. He was one of the co-founders of Apple. And this was his job was a TV repairman. And he used his knowledge of how the technology worked to make the first computer monitor. Right. So, like, yes, I think that it's absolutely a short-term decision. Like, this is what my point was about short-term versus long-term. Long-term, we want to build, like, Americans are creators. Like, that is the power of America and our history. Like, we can create a better world, but it's distributed. It's not the C-suite that comes up with this stuff. Right. And most of the innovations that have really, broken apart really created all these beneficial societal advancements, they were done, like, it wasn't necessarily just the company that, like John Deere or whatever. Like, it was John Deere in partnership with the farmers who are actually using the equipment that are like, hey, if you don't put a guard right here, things are going to get caught. Right. And like, that's dangerous physically, and it's not as efficient, and we have to be really cautious. So if you just put a guard there, we'd be like a lot better off. Like all of that feedback, the co-creation of good technology, like we've gotten out of the habit of that. And I think as a result, like, I think that there's a lot of tech that's like both amazing and also like really stupid at the same time. Yeah. Because, I do think that those general tech and tinkering knowledge and experience, like, that's unbelievably valuable. The human capital cost of that. And I'll give you a very specific example, because we talk about John Deere equipment or farm equipment in general. There's a huge shortage of people who are working as dealership technicians. And I talked to a former dealership technician about why it was so difficult. Like, I'm like, hey, these are not like, these are places where you might need employment, and here are these big employers. Why aren't people working at these places? And they're like, one, you make 3 times as much money driving the city dump truck than you do working at the dealership. 2, they've turned the job into essentially a Valvoline technician job where you're just following a checklist. You have no control over any price you're giving the customer or the process you do. If you found a better way to do it than John Deere corporate or whatever tells you to do it, you can't. You're not allowed to. You're completely just a cog in a machine, and the machine's also not that good. So it's like, what is the incentive for a smart, ambitious, innovative person to work executing a checklist set by executives who've never opened up a diesel engine, telling you what to do and what you can't do, when your neighbor is suffering? Like, that is not a good job. Right. And I think that's where, like, the long term, we need to like convince these people, like, if you actually want to save, if you want diesel technicians that are actually want to enter the field, like, give them control. Right. Like, so that when they see a problem, they can fix it. Because that is like, I don't know if you've ever been in a job where there was a problem and your boss didn't let you fix it.
Yep. It's incredibly frustrating.
It's not a good job.
Yeah, it's also horrible leadership, because we're not building the next generation of leaders that should delegate that so the next person can learn. Yeah. You open by talking about, per one of the things that you focus on is just broadly this almost, control system that's happening with larger corporations. And I think this is where, our organizations will come at this sometimes from different angles. But when and you're even seeing this in the conservative movement, it's really fascinating what's happening. And I think DeSantis has talked about this, and other folks have talked about this too. For a long time, both parties at different times have kind of just blindly, myopically followed industry and said, okay, cool, they're going to take us into the future. And to be 100% clear, we want, and we are in 100% agreement that we want industry to innovate and develop these new great emerging technologies. But I think your point, it needs to be underscored, which is, what are we foregoing long-term because of immediate term convenience, efficiency, and so on? Because I think about, there are few organizations that have a worse approval rating than Congress, big tech being one of them. There's a reason why. There isn't trust. There isn't partnership. Consumers are seen as the product. And as a consequence, there isn't that two-way symmetrical process of working together. And you take Henry Ford. Henry Ford wasn't perfect, but he worked to create a system where employees had a good paying job. They had dignified work. And we've really moved away from that in a lot of industries. And to kind of bring this into the right to repair discussion now, one of the things that we've talked about, and one of the issues that big issues, air quotes, that big tech or other organizations will bring up is, intellectual property rights. And we don't have to go fully into the whole history of that. I'm sure we could have an hour and a half long discussion about it, but it really comes down to the question of, so if the right to repair is I, the consumer, have the ability to take my iPhone to any third-party repair store and I can have it fixed in a way that's going to save me time, money, and headaches, does Apple or my phone creator have to give up their secret sauce? Are we worried that we're breaking into the Coca-Cola vault and the entire public is now going to have access to that secret sauce if we pass a right to repair law?
I mean, it's similar. If you take Coca-Cola as an example, it'd be like, if we let somebody else deliver Coca-Cola to Walmart, do we give up the recipe for Coca-Cola? It's like, if that's the case, then the recipe for Coca-Cola is not secured in any meaningful way.
Right.
If the, 100,000 retail employees who have been trained and authorized to use Apple tools are protecting a critical secret sauce for Apple, the secret's already out, and we should. I don't think that that's a credible argument, and I don't think it's made in good faith. I think it's really about contractual control of the repair process, not about protecting innovations. And we've had these conversations with companies. The other thing is that all the intellectual property laws are unaffected, right? So if somebody actually does, violate your copyright or a patent, all the same remedies are there. People could do that now, and the penalties are huge. Like copyright penalties after the DMCA in 1998, which is a reaction to Napster, after that law went into effect, like, you don't see people, especially businesses, violating those laws. I mean, maybe you have like teenagers on the internet doing it, but there's no business case for that because it's 5 years in prison for each violation of violating, breaking a technological protection measure. But now those technological protection measures are in place to prevent you from fixing your equipment. And that's where we need to be able to access the parts, tools, and information. And we've had like 30 intellectual property scholars look at this, and they don't see how that interferes with the company's right to produce proprietary information, to have exclusive rights to distribute it, if they have to provide a copy of those materials to the people who actually own the equipment. It seems like a reasonable part of ownership rights.
Sure. So are some of these companies, the boy who cried wolf, and that IP laws are actually enforced? Is that the case? I know we were talking about this beforehand, but are IP laws actually enforced in America? Is that something that is a red herring that's being pulled out of thin air?
Yeah, I think that people who maybe have, like myself, who grew up in the 90s when we did not necessarily have the same anti-piracy, system in place, would be surprised about just. I mean, I think honestly, sometimes IP laws are the most rigorously enforced laws in the country, because there's so much money at stake. So yes, I think if I was a company, and you look at all the ways that you're protected in the marketplace, the IP protections you have are among the most that government is doing for you. Bar none. That's like the biggest advantage you have from being in America is how rigorously we're enforcing those laws.
Right. And I guess the irony, kind of bringing it back to what's the long-term opportunity cost when that is being used as a way to solidify or reify and I'm using this more not as a literal term, a monopolistic domination over different marketplaces, such that there isn't growth, there isn't innovation, you're stalling consumer welfare. And I think that's something that you are seeing a panoply of different folks all agree, whether it's the consumer welfare standard of the convenience of phone repairs, whether it's farmers who aren't able to make their agricultural yields because they have to bring their John Deere tractor into the store when they could repair it themselves. There are actual consumer welfare harms that are happening here. And this is where I encourage any of our listeners, if you're on the fence about this, although statistically there's probably a low chance that's the case, that you would seek, ask yourself, where are there different avenues of your life where you are not able to have that control and exercise your personal private property rights?
Right. Which of your stuff do you believe you should not be allowed to fix because it violates the manufacturer's sovereignty?
Yep.
Which things in your life? Your car? Should you not be able to fix that? Should you not be able to fix your dishwasher? I mean, I think every single product, like the ownership rights in this country, like we've gotten away from some of these core values that we've enshrined and we've had this tradition of, and it's absurd. It's like, I mean, is there another reasonable way to do this? I mean, are we just going to say, oh no, you're serfs on this, on these platforms?
Right.
It's like, no,
Right. Yeah.
that's not what we're trying to do here in America. Like that's not what made this country work for the last couple hundred years. We made this country work because we believed people can make their own decisions.
So, okay, this is probably a good segue. A lot of this is self-evident, but there are a lot of benefits to right to repair laws that I think the average person may not think about immediately. You mentioned e-waste. We talked, economics and development. To give you a chance, what are some of the benefits to right to repair laws that you and your organization have looked at that maybe our audience might find fascinating they hadn't thought about?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think I really love that we talked about the value to investing in people's ability to tinker and create and learn. Like students, like the entrepreneurs. That's the other thing the other benefit that, we did this study, Repair Saves Families Big, where we looked at just how much money people could save if they had fixed instead of replaced their products. But the other thing you have to realize is, I learned this the other day from Kyle Wiens of iFixit. Apple's gross bill from Foxconn for making a phone at a Foxconn factory is around $5. Wow. Right? So obviously, if you're Apple, you're like, do I want to pay an expert, experienced, talented, trained technician in an American labor market, or do I want to pay $5 for a new phone?
Right.
It's like, the economics are just, but at the local level, we're talking about investing more on Main Street in people who are doing things that are creative and engaging and fun. Like being a technician is kind of fun. And it's local. It's, it makes our society more resilient. Like we learned this during the pandemic where things broke down and we couldn't import them because all the ports were shut down, all this stuff. Like if you couldn't fix it, right? Like the appliance technicians, they had a huge problem. They couldn't, people were stuck at home. They were cooking way more. They're using their appliances way more. Stuff was breaking. They weren't getting new parts and the technicians weren't equipped to do it. And like, that's a real issue. I think our resilience is the other part of it that we really need to pay attention to. Like if you were to bet dollars to donuts, like, will we have the same level of cheap stuff importation into this country in the next 10 years, or will there be some other interruption, whether it's global trade, other geopolitical conflict, a pandemic? We should be able to source and take care of ourselves more locally. Like, like we don't need to build a house of cards here, because if you're looking at the system, you're like, well, it doesn't, there's some reason to doubt its perfect stability. Right. And the people who are going to pay for that are, like just regular folks who are like, all of a sudden they can't get the stuff that they need. We need to build systems that are, that create that local, infrastructure so that people have some insulation from, like somebody makes a bad choice somewhere distant, somewhere else in the world. Like how much consequence do we want that to cost? Your auntie in Peoria, like that's a real question that I think right to repair is like part of. Like, let's not, the most efficient economy is also at times like the most fragile, and there's a real cost to that.
I have a lot of thoughts in response to that. I mean, one, I think the top line of what you're saying as it relates to the pandemic, the effects you saw there are national security implications that are emerging from this. The other thing is, and I'm bringing it back to hyper-specialization, but there is the resilience that comes with being able to, be captain of your own ship, so to speak. When we look at, I'm thinking back to Nestle, I don't remember the exact timeline, I think it was the 1980s, when they were bringing baby formula to very poverty-stricken areas of Western Africa. And mothers that recently had a newborn child, they give this formula, hey, this is going to nourish your child more than if you were to breastfeed your child. Well, what happened is they gave these samples out to the babies, to the mothers, and eventually, because they weren't producing breast milk and they had these samples, ran out of samples, oh no, you have to buy this from Nestle. We can't afford it. And I think about that as a horribly tragic story of where large corporations maybe Nestle meant well initially, although I'd like to think they didn't think through this for more than 5 seconds and they just wanted to make a buck off people who couldn't afford this. Corporations getting to the point where they are holding their audience captive such that they are trapped, they are enslaved to whatever it is their bottom line is they're pushing. And for any political party, and I think about conservatives in particular, if you're a prepper and you're worried about everything going, to hell in a handbasket, maybe we ought to reevaluate how resilient and industrious we are and look at how beholden to these corporations am I. And that's a fundamentally, I think, American ethos to have too. So I just wanted to yes and that, and give you a chance too, because one of the things that I know your organization has looked into, and we've done some research on this, but the environmental effects as well too.
Yeah.
How profound is right to repair in terms of advancing those benefits there?
Yeah, and I think the environmental aspects, like you have to view it in the whole ecosystem, like producing, shipping, consuming, then disposing of these products. Like there's a whole list of complicating factors. So, we have critical mineral, strategic, geopolitical conversations. Like, what are we going to do to, like China controls these minerals and like this stuff is coming from the Congo, cobalt or whatever. More than like we have so much more of those materials in use or just sitting in junk drawers in this country, like then we're going to be getting from these crazy mining and development. They want to mine 2 miles underneath the surface of the ocean to get stuff that we're just putting in junk drawers and or building into disposable products. I mean, that's like somebody needs to think about this with more than one brain cell, right? So yes, there's like the environmental harms of extraction are by far the most damaging part of the process. Yeah. Like 85% of the environmental impact from a smartphone is making it. So if you can use it for 5 years instead of 2 years, you've, you're more than doubled, like you more cut in more than half the total environmental impact. And we did a study that said if Americans use their phones for 1 year longer on average, have the same climate benefits as taking 636,000 cars off the road. Yeah. To me, this is like the low-hanging fruit. Right. We don't actually want a whole slew of disposable electronics clogging landfills and, we have to pay for and do all. We want good stuff that lasts. And like, if we get that, that takes so much pressure off the whole system of environmental, the environmental consequences of our modern economy. Right. It's like the most obvious thing to do to me. Yeah. It's like, and I think it's been a thing where, I don't think you need to, be like a real like environmentalist to just be like, okay, that's just common sense. Right. Like that's just
excessive
don't make
waste.
a mess. Yeah. Right. Like that's really the ethic of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, if it's conservationism, the idea of, you leave the land in better condition than how you found it initially. And that's something corporations used to really, really uphold. And so, yeah, I agree. I don't think that's the partisan issue either. Okay, so we're advocates. And so, of course, we have to have the discussion about right to repair laws specifically. And we're shooting this a few months in advance of the Texas legislative session. I know you're focused on a lot of different states, but for, I guess, for all advocacy you're doing on right to repair, what to you encompasses a solid consumer-centric right to repair law?
Yeah, I mean, I think my principle is, as I said before, what stuff do you own that you should not be allowed to fix? We should be allowed to fix our stuff. And so our focus on this legislation is to the extent that there is already a way to fix something, there needs to be open access to the parts, tools, and information necessary to fix that. And now manufacturers want exemptions they say that there's security implications. We have not found a single independent security expert willing to agree with anything that they've put forward. They have security experts, but they tend to disappear really quick after, talking to the people that we put up against them. Oh yeah, here's the person who designed the security system for like the Pentagon or whatever. And they're talking to them like, fixing it undermines security. And they're like, it's not secure if that's true. Right. Two, so we there's no stuff that we shouldn't be able to fix, and there's no things that we should be able to hide. Like if it's a repair process, it needs to be designed so that people can do it.
Right.
And so and we want to cover the stuff that we own to the greatest extent possible. Now, of course, when you're dealing with, legislatures and, sometimes you're like, okay, to me, I would rather solve the problem holistically for a smaller number of products than to give like half a right to repair to fix a lot of things. Cause it's like, well, what's you either can fix it or you can't.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the standard. Can we fix it? Do we have everything we need? Is it total parity with what the manufacturers produce and use for themselves? Or are there exemptions?
Sure.
And why? And if the reasons for those is basically, and they kind of trot out these things, we've dealt with every single one of those.
Sure. Yeah.
So to me, that's what I'm looking for. I would love to cover every product. Whatever products we do cover, I want the right to repair to be completely comprehensive.
Yep.
Everything that's made to fix that product that the manufacturer's distributing or using to fix that product, an independent shop or the owner of that product needs access to those things.
No, 100% makes sense, and agree on that front. And kind of bring it back to national, statewide advocacy for folks listening. Are there any states in particular you want to highlight in terms of either they've passed something that's a good model, or states just to be on the lookout for next session that you see as optimistic?
Well, can't answer that question.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess you'd be a multi-billionaire if you had the crystal ball to predict what's going to happen.
Well, no, that and we don't want to be completely predictable.
Yep.
Let's get them scrambling a little bit.
So security can in fact exist on this front. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it's just obviously the strategy is probably the thing that we're most sensitive about. I would say that if you want to look at, first of all, Colorado has passed 3 laws, so they're the most comprehensive. They're the only state now that protects a farmer's right to fix their equipment. But in terms of it was really interesting what we were able to do in Oregon, in part because, we started to get support from big tech in some ways, in some new ways. Like I almost don't like to use big tech because it feels derogatory. But Google came in, worked with us really carefully on how to handle some of the software restrictions on repairing things in a way that they felt was fair and equitable and was consistent with, if you actually wanted people to be able to fix things, but you had, calibration or other kind of technological reasons for setting things up a certain way. Yeah. How would you protect consumers in that environment? And we came up with that model in Oregon, and that was a really big win for us. And so I would think, that's one place where I think that kind of changed the game. Minnesota had a really broad law that we're really excited about. California's law, covers all consumer products. So California, Oregon are consumer products. Minnesota is consumer and business electronics, which I think people underestimate. Most of the computing done in the world is remote in a data center. We need to be able to fix that equipment, and the people who fix that equipment are clamoring for access to the parts, tools, and information that they need. But yeah, I mean, I think around the country, we had 31 to 32 states that had active legislation at some point in 2024. Whatever state people are in, if there isn't unless it's an off year for Texas, there's going to be legislators who are calling us and being like, well, what should we do? And if you want to get involved, if you think your state should have this, it's amazing. Some of the bills that we've won, we've been working in a place for 8 years, and we built the first bill we did in New York. That was a huge movement that we had to build to get that through. And then some of the other states, it's like a storm in a teacup or whatever. It's just it immediately happens. And so I especially now that the kind of first adopter penalty is kind of been paid, I think that there's more states that can do this. And I also know for a fact, by the way, that the manufacturers, when you call some manufacturers, when you call them and ask them, hey, I would like the spare part for this product, they will ask you, hey, are you in California or Minnesota? Right. Because those are the only two that have strong and enforced laws. The Colorado and Oregon laws come into effect a little bit at the beginning of next year. Right.
Okay. Well, and you kind of hinted at this. I imagine the first episode we did on Right to Repair, we had some folks in the IT environment, as well as we have a lot of ag, a lot of farmers in Texas who they palpably feel and experience these issues and maybe hadn't put a name on it, right to repair. But we've had folks ask, how can we get involved? How can we get engaged? So from your organization's perspective, a chance to highlight any of the things that, you're looking for partnership on, or ways that anyone who's listening can step up in likely Texas, because this is a TPPF podcast, to get involved in advocacy. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to follow my work and you want to get updates on this stuff, if you go to pirg.org, there's a place to sign up for a newsletter. There's probably going to be a promoted right to repair petition, or targeted email to send to a lawmaker. There is a bill, Farmers' Right to Repair bill in Congress. Maybe you want your Texas legislators to know about that, the ones who are serving in the delegation. But then, if you go to texperg.org, which is the local PERG chapter here in Texas, you could also sign up for their emails, hear about this. Our coalition website is texas.repair.org, which is we use that just as and this is from repair.org, which is like kind of a trade association that represents both nonprofits and repair businesses that are working in this space. And so those would be the places to really get engaged. And if you certainly, if you want a very narrow focus, and texas.repair.org is a place to pay attention to. That's going to have the latest. And if you sign up there, then you'll get the information on what's happening in Texas.
Great. Well, I'll add then from the Texas perspective, we had our first lawmaker on the podcast was Chairman Giovanni Capriglione. And, at this point we had my colleague and I were working on artificial intelligence, data privacy, all this other stuff. And we were about to publish our rights to repair paper. And so we're going back and forth. And I asked the chairman, what are some of the issues you're working on for next session? He mentions AI and some of the, incredible stuff that he's doing in that front. And then he just, the throwaway comment, he's like, and it's insane that we don't have a right to repair law in Texas yet. And so I want to shout out Chairman Giovanni Capriglione, who I know is going to be a leading voice on this next session. And so my way of saying to the audience, Texas will have great chances to get involved in the advocacy front here. And I think, it's great to know we have organizations that we can partner with. And I think this is something I love about my job too, being in technology policy, is we're going to find a lot of different diverse coalition partners coming into next session to work on this. And so my way of saying thank you for your organization, your leadership on this front. And I really want to encourage our audience to check out the work you've been doing, because as I recall, my colleague cited your organization numerous times in our paper. And so just, my way of concluding that there will be a fight on this next session. We got a lot of folks that are ready to step up to the plate.
I love it. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
It's my favorite thing.
Yeah. Well, Nathan, thank you so much. And we'll, in the description, we'll link to your website to make sure folks can stay involved. Do you have a Twitter account or anything else?
X.
Excuse me. Sorry. Still not used to that.
N Proctor, Proctor. That is where you'll find me. I tweet exclusively about right to repair.
Okay.
And sometimes the Boston Celtics.
Okay. Well, the last question I'll ask you, since you, I think you're the first guest we've had that's come from out of state into Texas to be here. You've been in Austin for a few days. What's been your favorite thing you've seen or done so far, aside from this podcast? Of course,
I 100% picked the best weather week.
You did.
To come to the city of Austin. Did. It's been gorgeous. We went out on a boat. We rented a boat to go on the lake, and we had barbecue, and we're doing a summit on electronics sustainability, and that's been really, really productive and great. A lot of the manufacturers are kind of really working with us more collaboratively now that we've kind of built a stronger political movement. And I love Austin. Austin's fun.
Yeah.
It's also cheaper than Boston, so
that's right. Yeah, and the people here. You've enjoyed the people here in Austin as well too.
Absolutely.
Good,
I love coming to the South. Yeah, people treat you nice. It's great. I'm an organizer, so I love talking to people.
Right.
And then the fact that everyone talks to each other here. Yeah, I wish the Northeast was a little bit more like that. I think people think people in the Northeast are grumpier than we really are. We're just focused.
Yeah.
But I love I love the atmosphere here in Austin, and the city's done an awesome job welcoming us to our conference. It's been super fun.
Good. Well, we love Texas. We love Austin. You guys are always welcome here in TVPF too. So, well, without further ado, for folks, tuning into the very end, thank you. As mentioned, we'll have some of the PERG resources in the show notes below. TexasPolicy.com too. We have our paper on rights to repair, which I don't think we had last time we did an episode on this. So, I'll just conclude.
Paper.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you.
We really like that. Yeah.
Well, I'll just conclude by saying this has been great, and I'm looking forward to the next session in this fight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this too. This is awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan.